The Washington Commanders are going to be playing against the Denver Broncos in Week 2 of the 2023 NFL season. And we're going to be previewing that matchup here on the Commanders Report. But before we get into that, make sure you click that subscribe button to join us for our Week 2 watch party that we're going to be doing here on the Commanders Report. We're going to be going live about 30 minutes before kickoff. So Eastern time, that's 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure you turn on your notifications, click that subscribe button, and join us on Sunday for that watch party. Now, the Commanders made some roster moves here. Jamison Crowder was signed to the active roster today, wide receiver. Formerly drafted by the Washington Redskins at the time in 2015, was with the team until 2018. Comes back, signs with the practice squad. Now he's been added to the 53. And then William Bradley King, the edge rusher, has been released from the 53-man roster. And with those roster moves out of the way, let's get into this matchup between the Commanders and the Denver Broncos, who lost their Week 1 matchup at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders and Jimmy Garoppolo by a final score of 17-16. And the Commanders are going to be looking to try to get to 2-0 here to start their 2023 campaign. They've got the Bills at home and then the Eagles on the road coming up after this. So getting the 2-0 would kind of allow them to play with house money during those tough matchups. But for this week, Week 2, Sean Payton with the Denver Broncos is their head coach. Of course, they're 0-1, just lost to the Raiders. And then the offensive scheme that the Commanders are going to have to deal with is a modern-style pro spread offense that's kind of been popularized by Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, those kinds of guys. Matt Nagy runs this kind of system as well. Sean Payton belongs to the second generation of the West Coast offense, which kind of spread things out a little bit more there in the 90s. And the defensive scheme with new defensive coordinator and former Broncos head coach Vance Joseph runs a really unique defense when it comes to NFL schemes today. Cover 3 match is what they love to do. So it's kind of a mix between Fangio, Nick Saban, Wade Phillips, and Mike Zimmer. It's kind of a weird hybrid between those kinds of systems. Vance Joseph has coached under a lot of those personalities, and you can definitely see the influences in his defense. Nobody else in the National Football League runs a defense like this, and it wasn't super successful with the Arizona Cardinals when he was their defensive coordinator, and now that he's back in Denver, some guys like Justin Simmons are running this system again. Now you take a look at this Week 1 matchup that the Broncos had and how they did this past week on Sunday. Russell Wilson went 27 of 34 for 177 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. He actually looked pretty darn good. Maybe not explosive, maybe not dynamic, maybe not the Russell Wilson that competed for MVP trophies, but he definitely looked better than he looked in Nathaniel Hackett's system last year. That is for damn sure. And then, of course, Javonte Williams, 52 yards. Samaje Perine was their leading rusher with 37 yards, and then they ended up losing to Jimmy Garoppolo and the Raiders by a final score of 17-16. So some of the players for the Denver Broncos that you're going to have to keep your eye on as a Commanders fan here, starting with the quarterback, Russell Wilson, who we just talked about, man. And last week, I thought he played pretty darn good, but I also don't think that you have to worry about Russ too much. I think he's lost a little bit of a step in terms of his scrambling ability. He's still a pretty decent quarterback accuracy-wise. He still makes decent decisions. I think that this is a very QB-friendly system that Sean Payton has him running. But he doesn't have a whole lot of dynamic weapons in this offense, and we're going to get to that later on in today's show. And there's some people in the Commanders community here that think that when he was available for trade back during the 2022 offseason, that the Washington Commanders should have grabbed Russell Wilson and traded for him. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section, what your opinion is. Should the Washington Commanders have traded for Russell Wilson during the 2022 offseason instead of the Denver Broncos? Give me a yes or give me a no. This is going to be a pinned comment on today's show. So when YouTube throws you an ad break here, it'll be in a couple of seconds here. Just let me know yes or no down there in the comments. All right, so now let's talk about the rest of the impact players here other than the quarterback. You got Patrick Surtain, the second, who is one of, if not the best cornerback in the National Football League. They're going to use him. They're going to put him on an island. That's what they've been doing here through Week 1, is that they've been having him one-on-one with their best receiver, and they kind of shift their coverage away from Patrick Surtain to give them a numbers advantage in pass protection. Having a guy like Patrick Surtain completely changes the numbers game, in pass coverage for a defense, so he's definitely somebody you got to watch out for. Justin Simmons, one of the best safeties in the National Football League, in my opinion. He's a pro in this cover 3 match defense, so you definitely have to watch out for him. Javonte Williams, a good running back here. He had the most carries in week 1, but he didn't have the most yards. He is coming off a major leg injury, so it's going to be interesting to see if he can kind of get things going, because before his injury, he was one of the most dynamic running back talents in the National Football League, and then the best wide receiver by far on this Denver Broncos team right now, because Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick are dealing with injuries, is Courtland Sutton. And really, if he's your best wide receiver, I think that your wide receiver room kind of sucks, if I'm being frank with you. It's going to be tough for Russell Wilson in this one with all the talent in the Commanders' secondary right now. But those are the players that you need to be keeping your eye on. Now let's talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of this Denver Broncos team, starting with the offensive coaching and Sean Payton calling the plays. He's one of the best in football. In my opinion, a top 5 offensive play caller in the game today. He's really, really good at putting his players and his personnel and putting them in positions to succeed and getting the ball in the hands of his best players in space. He's really good at that, so you got to really stay disciplined if you're the Commanders on defense this week, even though maybe the weaponry and the talent on the offense isn't exactly what you're going to see for the rest of this season. And then, of course, that lockdown cornerback 1 and Patrick Surtain we talked about completely changes the numbers game when it comes to pass coverage for the defense. So look for those rotating coverages. Maybe try to take advantage of some one-on-one opportunities if Terry McLaurin can separate from Patrick Surtain on the times that he does. That's going to be an interesting matchup. And then also the solid offensive line that they have here. They signed Ben Powers, a good offensive guard, this offseason. They've got Garrett Bowles, who really played well against the Raiders last week. So they've got a pretty good offensive line to protect Russell Wilson and create running lanes for their running backs. But their weaknesses, offensive weaponry, like we said, Courtland Sutton's going to be their number 1 guy. Their tight end is Greg Dulcich, who I like. He's a pretty decent player. But, is he really going to be a dynamic number 2 receiving type option for them? I certainly don't think so. And then there's no real impact defensive lineman. Randy Gregory is their number 1 guy, who is fine, but he's dealt with injuries, and he's not really a number 1 true alpha type edge rusher in this league, in my opinion. So a lackluster offensive line in Washington should be able to survive in this one. Now, coming up here, I got 4 keys to victory for your Washington Commanders against the Denver Broncos this week. But before I get into those, let's talk about our sponsor today at BetUS. Go to chatsports.com/bet. Use promo code CHAT125 to get a 125% deposit bonus today. Now, what does that mean? That means if you put in a deposit of $100 to $600, they're going to give you 125% of that money back to you to use on your bet. So if you put in $100, you get $125 additional dollars, $225 total to use on your bets this football season. So go chatsports.com/bet and use promo code CHAT125 to get that deposit bonus today. First thing that the Commanders need to do to win this football game is that they need to handle the altitude, okay? So they need to handle, Denver is a really tough place to play, plain and simply. They're at Mile High Stadium, Empower Stadium, whatever you want to call it now. It's a really tough place to play, especially early on in the season when guys aren't necessarily, in game shape just yet. It's definitely a tough environment to go to if you are an opposing football team. And, some teams can handle it, some teams can't. Last week, of course, the Raiders did a good job by getting that victory on the road. So obviously, the Broncos are vulnerable at home this season. So the Commanders can absolutely come in there and win this football game, but they're going to have to handle the altitude if they're going to do just that. Number 2 on my list, they have to stay disciplined, particularly on defense. Now, this past week for the Commanders, they gave up a ton of turnovers and penalties, 8 penalties and 3 turnovers versus the Arizona Cardinals. Now, of course, the Cardinals shot themselves in the foot as well. But I'm looking at the future here. Commanders can't make those kinds of mistakes. Plain and simply, if they're playing a better football team in week 1, they likely lose that game. They only won by 4 points against what many people believe will be the worst team in the National Football League this year. You can't make those same mistakes here in week 2. I think that this is going to be a disciplined football team in the Denver Broncos. They're vulnerable, don't get me wrong, but I definitely think you can't go into this one with 3 turnovers from Sam Howell, and I definitely think you need to stay disciplined on defense so that Sean Payton doesn't school you schematically. And then also, you got to spread the ball around on offense, in my opinion. Like we talked about, Patrick Surtain II, he's going to be on Terry McLaurin for most of the snaps in this football game. So that means you have to spread things out amongst your other players on this offense. That includes the wide receivers here with Jahan Dotson, who had a really good week last week. Curtis Samuel, who did a really nice job last week as well. De'Ami Brown, get him involved as well. And then also the running backs, Antonio Gibson, who's kind of your receiving back this year. Get him involved. And then also B-Rob, you want to get the run game going better than you did in week 1. You got to spread the ball around. You got to share the sugar here because you can't rely on just Terry McLaurin because he's got one of the best cornerbacks in football covering him this week, and I think that you have to really rely on your other guys and really spread the ball around if you want to have a successful offensive attack here in week 2. And then the final thing that I think the Commanders need to do is that they need to play their game, all right? Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, do the things that make you successful. Run your offense, run your defense, run that off-zone coverage that Jack Del Rio loves to run. Make sure that talented defensive line can go do their thing. Hopefully Chase Young is going to be able to play this week. But plain and simply, there's nothing about this Broncos team that's going to make you deviate away from what you do best. They don't have a great defensive line, so as bad as the offensive line is for the Commanders, it shouldn't be that much of an issue heading into this week's matchup. But, on offense, they don't have any really dynamic talents that are going to make you change your game plan defensively or anything like that. You're allowed to do what you want to do if you're Eric Bieniemy and Jack Del Rio, the coordinators for this Commanders squad. So I think going into the week, you have to focus on playing your brand of football, and if you do that, you're going to have a good chance of winning this week's matchup. Now it's your turn, man. Go into the comments section and predict the score of Commanders versus Broncos in week 2. I think it's going to be a very highly contested matchup. I think it's going to be pretty darn close. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. As far as my score prediction this week, I'm going to go 23-20. Commanders win on a game-winning field goal by Joey Sly. I think it's going to be close all the way through this game. I think Sean Payton's going to do some things well in this one. I think Emmanuel Forbes might have another good game. But Chase Young's going to be out there. This defensive line is going to be really, really good once again. I think it's going to be close, but I got the Commanders winning this one on the road to go to 2-0 heading into week 3 versus the Buffalo Bills, and you can play with house money. All right, that'll be it for me today, guys. Really do appreciate all of your support for the channel. Make sure you click that subscribe button for free Commanders updates throughout the week. We're going to have Chase Young injury updates, all this different stuff coming up before the start of this week 2 matchup. And then, of course, we got that watch party for this week 2 matchup starting at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you want all that Commanders coverage this week, make sure you click that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and that'll be it for me today, guys. I'll see you guys later. And as always, hail to the Commanders.